I thought the boy in my backyard was scary until I found out who was in my house. The question my mother asked me that day still curls like smoke in the back of my mind. It's been decades, but I can see her face, pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a terror I was too young to understand. She knelt in front of me, the flashing lights of a police car strobing across her features, and her voice was a strained whisper. "Elian," she said, her hands gripping my small shoulders. "Were you with the boy in the backyard the whole time?" To understand why that simple question felt like a key turning in a lock I never knew existed, you have to go back to the beginning of that grey, silent morning. I was 6. My world was the size of our small house and the sprawling, untamed yard behind it. My older brother, Kalen, was my other half, the captain to my first mate in every adventure. But that morning, Kalen was sick. A fever had taken hold of him in the night, a fierce heat that left him flushed and quiet. I remember watching my mother's frantic movements as she bundled him into a blanket, her face a mask of worry. "I'm taking him to the hospital, Elian," she'd said, her voice tight. "You stay here. Don't go outside. Don't open the door for anyone. Do you understand?" I nodded, my attention fixed on Kalen's glassy eyes. The house felt cavernously large as the front door clicked shut behind them. The usual morning chaos. Kalen's shouts, my mother's laughter, the clatter of breakfast dishes was gone, replaced by a profound stillness. The only sounds were the low groan of the refrigerator and the distant hum of traffic. For a child, boredom is a physical thing. It's an itch under the skin, a weight in your limbs. I spent the first hour in front of the television, the garish colours of cartoons doing little to fill the emptiness. My mother called once, her voice distant and crackling over the line. "Everything okay, sweetie?" "Yes, Mum. I'll call again later." "Be good." The day dragged on. I migrated to the kitchen, rolling my small metal cars across the cool, slick linoleum. The roar of their tiny wheels was a poor substitute for my brother's voice. And that's when I heard it. A sound from outside. A soft, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. Our kitchen had a large, single-pane glass door that looked out onto the backyard. It was my mother's pride and her constant frustration. A huge, wild space she never had time to tame. The grass was long and damp, swallowing my ankles whenever I ran through it. A thick line of woods bordered the back of the property, a dark, tangled wall that always felt like it was watching. In the center of the yard stood a single, gnarled oak tree. A tire swing, Kalen's and my greatest lobbying victory, hung from one of its thickest branches. Carved into the bark was a crude stick-figure family, Mom, Kalen, and me. My eyes scanned the yard. The thumping had stopped. The world outside was still, painted in shades of green and brown under an overcast sky. I pressed my nose against the cool glass, my breath fogging a small circle. Nothing. Maybe it was a squirrel or a bird. But then I saw it. Behind the wide trunk of the oak tree where the shadows were deepest, a pair of hands. They were small, like mine, but grimy, the fingers curled around the rough bark. They were perfectly still. My blood went cold. A scream, thin and sharp, escaped my throat before I could stop it. I scrambled away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I ran for the phone in the living room, my little cars scattering across the floor. My fingers fumbled with the worn buttons. I punched in my mother's cell number, the one she'd made me memorize. It rang and rang and rang. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. A sob of frustration and fear caught in my chest. Giving up, I let the receiver dangle from its cord. Curiosity, that powerful, treacherous force in a lonely child, pulled me back toward the kitchen. I peeked around the entryway, my body half hidden, and I saw him. He was no longer behind the tree. He was standing right in front of the glass door, his face just inches from it. He was a boy, maybe a year or two older than me. His hair was a pale, messy shock of blonde, and his clothes, what looked like they might have once been a white shirt and grey pants, were ragged and smeared with dirt. He wasn't smiling. His expression was flat, unreadable. He just stared. As our eyes met, he slowly raised one hand and gave a small, hesitant wave. My fear was suddenly replaced by a tidal wave of intrigue. I crept closer, the cold of the floor seeping into my bare feet. I stayed on my side of the glass, a safe distance away. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He just watched me with wide, unnervingly still eyes. They were the colour of a stormy sky. He beckoned with his fingers, a silent, urgent gesture. "Come here." I shook my head. "How'd you get in my yard? The fence is locked." He simply shrugged his small shoulders, a gesture of helplessness. His gaze flickered down to the doorknob, then back to my face. The plea was obvious. He wanted in. I thought of my mother's stern warning, the anger that would flash in her eyes if she found me with a strange boy she'd never seen before. I shook my head more firmly this time. "I can't." A flicker of something, disappointment, frustration, crossed his face. He seemed to understand. He backed away from the door and walked slowly, deliberately toward the tire swing. He sat in it, his small frame looking lost, and began to sway gently, his worn-out sneakers dragging faint lines in the dirt below. I had to use the bathroom, a sudden urgent need brought on by the adrenaline. I didn't want to lose sight of him. I ran to the glass door, fumbled with the lock until I heard it click, and sprinted to the small bathroom off the hall. It was the fastest I'd ever gone in my life. When I returned, heart still pounding, he was still there. He'd stopped swinging and was just sitting, his head bowed, looking smaller and sadder than before. A pang of pity hit me. He was alone, just like me. He just wanted a friend. That's what I told myself anyway. I pressed my face close to the glass again. "Do you want me to push you?" I shouted, my voice muffled by the door. He didn't move or look up. I felt a prickle of annoyance. I was trying to be nice. I took a deep breath, my hand hovering over the lock. My mother's warning echoed in my head. Don't open the door for anyone. But he wasn't a grown-up. He was just a kid. A sad, lonely kid. My fingers turned the lock. The door creaked open, and the damp, earthy smell of the yard filled the kitchen. I stepped out onto the wet grass, the blades cold and sharp against my feet. I walked toward him, my heart doing a nervous little flutter. "Hey," I said, my voice softer now. "Do you want me to push you?" This time, he looked up. His face was smudged with dirt, and his stormy eyes were fixed on me. He still didn't speak, but he gave a slow, hesitant nod. I got behind the swing and pushed. He gripped the rough ropes, his knuckles white. The swing flew forward, and for the first time, a smile ghosted across his lips. It transformed his face, chasing away some of the sorrow. For a few minutes, it felt normal. I was just a boy, playing with a new friend in my backyard. I pushed him higher and higher, the rusty chains of the swing groaning in protest. As he swung, I started to notice things. One of his knees was scraped raw, a patch of angry red against his pale, grimy skin. His thin shirt had slipped off his shoulder, revealing a constellation of faint yellowish bruises. But the thing that held my gaze was a mark on his neck, partially hidden by his shaggy hair. It was a deep, ugly bloom of purple and blue, shaped almost like a thumbprint. I had no idea what could have made a mark like that. I stopped the swing. "My turn," I said, trying to sound cheerful. He slid off without a word and moved to push me. As I soared through the air, I told him all about my adventures with Kaylin, about the fort we'd built in the woods, about the time we'd tried to catch a frog in the creek. He listened, his head cocked to the side, but I saw his eyes darting back toward my house, over and over again. His whole body was coiled with a strange, nervous energy, like a stray cat that expects to be kicked at any moment. It was during one of my upward arcs that I heard it, the shrill, insistent ringing of the telephone from inside the house. My mother. I jumped off the swing, stumbling as I landed. "I have to get that," I said, turning to run inside. A small, strong hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. I turned, startled. The boy was staring at me, his eyes wide with what looked like pure panic. He shook his head violently, his grip tightening on my arm. He brought a finger to his lips in a universal sign for silence, then pointed frantically at the house, then back at me, a desperate plea in his expression. I was confused. "It's just my mum." He shook his head again, more frantically this time. He looked terrified. In my 6-year-old mind, I translated his fear simply. He was afraid I would tell my mother about him, that I'd get in trouble and he'd have to leave. It made a strange kind of sense. To placate him, I let the phone ring and ring until it finally fell silent. He visibly relaxed, his grip on my wrist loosening. To distract me from going inside, he pointed up at the oak tree, then mimed climbing. A game. I was a master tree climber, something my mother constantly scolded me for. It was the perfect diversion. He was clumsy, scared of the height. I had to show him where to put his feet, which branches were strong enough to hold him. After a few feet, he gave up, content to watch me from the ground. I scrambled up, the rough bark familiar under my hands, until I was perched on my favorite branch, high above the yard. From up there, I could see the whole neighborhood, the rooftops and the street that ran past our house. And that's when I saw it. My mother's blue station wagon turning the corner at the end of our block. Panic seized me. If she saw me in the tree, I'd be grounded for a year. I scrambled down with a speed born of terror. "You have to hide," I whispered urgently to the boy. "My mum's here. Go on, hide in the woods until I can come get you." He just nodded, his eyes fixed on the front of the house, and without a backward glance he slipped away, disappearing into the dark green tangle of the woods as silently as he had appeared. I bolted for the kitchen door, slid it shut, locked it, and ran to the living room, trying to look as innocent and bored as possible. Minutes later, the front door opened. "Elaine? I'm home." My mother looked exhausted. Kaelin was asleep in her arms, still wrapped in his blanket. "How was everything?" she asked, her voice weary. "Fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Boring." She carried Kaelin to his room, and I heard her murmuring to him as she tucked him in. She came back out and walked toward the kitchen. "I'm going to make some tea. Do you want some juice?" "Okay," I said. She walked into the kitchen and then stopped. Dead still. I saw her body go rigid. She was staring at the glass door. I couldn't see her face, but I felt the atmosphere in the house shift, a sudden drop in pressure. She backed out of the kitchen slowly, her eyes wide and fixed on me. "Elian," she started, her voice a strange, tight thing. "Where is thee?" She never finished her sentence. An ear-splitting crack echoed through the house. The massive pane of glass on the kitchen door didn't just break, it exploded inward, a shower of glittering shards cascading across the linoleum floor. We both screamed. My mother reacted instantly, grabbing me and pulling me back, away from the kitchen. "Stay here," she commanded, her voice shaking but firm. She crept to the edge of the kitchen, peering around the corner at the gaping hole that led to our backyard. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. "Is someone there?" Silence. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I thought she was going to find the boy. I thought I was in the worst trouble of my life. But when she finally stepped carefully into the kitchen, she found nothing. The yard was empty. The boy was gone. Then I saw it, lying amidst the wreckage of the glass. A smooth, grey river stone, the size of a man's fist. As my mother stared at it, another sound cut through the quiet. The high-pitched squeal of tires, followed by the roar of an engine accelerating hard, fading rapidly into the distance. My mom's head snapped up. She ran through the house to the front window, peering out into the street, but the car was already gone. She grabbed the phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial 911. We waited on the front lawn for the police, my brother still sleeping obliviously in the car. It wasn't until later, after the police had come and gone, after the glass had been swept up, that I finally told her. We were packing an overnight bag. "Mom," I said quietly, "there was a boy here." She stopped folding my pajamas and looked at me. Her face, already pale from the day's events, lost its remaining colour. I told her everything. About the boy at the door, his ragged clothes, the fact that he couldn't talk. About pushing him on the swing and climbing the tree. She listened, her expression growing more and more horrified. When I finished, she knelt in front of me, and that's when she asked me the question. "Elian," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Were you with the boy in the backyard the whole time?" "Mostly," I said. "I only came inside right when you got home." She closed her eyes and took a ragged breath, as if the air had been punched from her lungs. Then she asked another question. "Did you answer the phone when I called the second time?" "No," I said, confused. "The boy, he didn't want me to. He was scared you'd find out he was here." My mother's eyes snapped open. "Elian," she said, her voice barely audible. Someone answered. The line clicked open, but nobody said anything. I just heard, breathing. I thought it was you, playing a game. The pieces started to fall into place, forming a picture far more terrifying than I could have imagined. When my mother first went into the kitchen before the window shattered, she had stopped because she noticed something wrong. The butcher block on the counter was there, but the slots for her 3 largest kitchen knives were empty. Later, while the police were there, she checked upstairs. Our bedrooms had been tossed, not violently, but methodically. Drawers were open, closets were ajar. Someone had been inside our house, searching for something while I played with the silent boy in the yard. He hadn't been beckoning me to play, he'd been luring me out. He hadn't been afraid of my mother finding him. He'd been a lookout. The shattered window wasn't an act of vandalism, it was a signal. A signal that my mother was home, and it was time for the person inside to leave. We didn't stay in the house that night. We didn't stay there the next night either. The reason we left in such a hurry, the final detail that tipped my mother's fear into outright panic, was the last thing she discovered before we walked out the door. The spare key, the one we kept hidden in a magnetic box under the front porch railing, was gone.